In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a woman named Zuri. She was known for her beauty, her grace, and the wisdom that shone in her eyes. Zuri's husband, Tunde, was a proud man, strong and hard-working, but there was something in the air that made the village elders uneasy. Their union, which once glimmered with promise, had begun to show cracks, and the whispers of the wind carried secrets that only Zuri could hear. Though she was a beloved wife, Zuri often found herself waking up with an inexplicable feeling of dread. There were days when Tunde, her once loving husband, would return from his work in the fields with eyes full of shadow. His greetings were curt, his smiles forced, and he avoided looking directly at her, as if there was a secret between them, one that only he knew. The villagers had long suspected that Tunde was hiding something. His sister, Adama, would often visit, and though her presence was warm, Zuri noticed the quiet exchange between the two, an exchange that was hard to define, but felt like the distance between the sun and the moon. Whenever Tunde and Adama shared a look, Zuri felt a pang in her heart, a sense that she was no longer the woman she used to be in Tunde's eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fireflies began their dance, Zuri prepared the evening meal. She stirred the pot in silence, her mind wandering over the strange events of the past few weeks. Tunde had become more distant, and Adama's visits had grown frequent. The village elders, who were wise with the ways of the world and the spirits, had begun to speak of omens, of untrustworthy hearts and betrayals hidden in the shadows. Zuri felt something shift in the air around her as she worked. Her hands moved automatically, yet her mind was sharp, noticing every small detail that seemed off. Tunde's empty gaze as he sipped the cup of juice she had made for him, the way he had suddenly started leaving the house at odd hours, the secretive smiles shared between him and his sister. It was one night, when the moon was full and the air was thick with the smell of jasmine flowers, that Zuri finally trusted her intuition. She could not shake the feeling that her husband, the man she had once loved, had a plan. She could feel it in the way he moved through the house, like a man with a hidden purpose. And in her heart, she knew that this time, the danger was not from the outside world, but from the very man she had once called her own. Her ancestors had always told her that a woman's heart is a bridge between the living and the spirits. Zuri listened closely to her own heart, and it whispered to her that something was wrong. Very wrong. As the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Tunde's mind was consumed by a dark thought, a thought that had taken root in his heart over time. Zuri, his beautiful wife, had grown distant in recent weeks, but it was not just the distance that troubled him. There were rumors in the village, whispers of riches and land, of wealth that had come to him through the years, wealth he could not share, wealth he could not spend with Zuri, because she was stubborn. She clung to old values, to the traditions of their ancestors, which now felt like chains to him. Tunde had long since stopped listening to the quiet voice in his soul that once loved her. He began to see her as an obstacle to his true desires, a barrier that stood between him and the life of power and luxury he had always dreamed of. And the only way to achieve this was through her removal, quietly, with precision, as though she had never existed. One evening, after the sun had set and the village had settled into its nightly rhythm, Tunde slipped into the hidden corner of their small home where he kept his secrets. His hands, once steady and strong, trembled slightly as he prepared the poison. It was an ancient recipe, one his own father had once whispered about, passed down in whispers from one man to the next, a dark inheritance that would grant him everything he desired, but at a terrible cost. The poison, made from a rare herb that grew deep in the forest, was slow-acting. It would take time, days, perhaps weeks, but Zuri would not know until it was too late. It had the power to weaken the heart, dull the senses, and finally, when the time was right, take her life. Tunde could already see it in his mind, her body weakening, her beauty fading, her spirit slowly slipping away. And with her gone, he would be free. Free to claim everything he had longed for, without anyone to stand in his way. He stared at the small vial in his hand, its contents shimmering under the dim light of the fire. He had made the decision. No turning back now. His sister, Adama, would play her part too. She would be the one to deliver the cup to Zuri, carefully handing it to her without question, and when the time came, she would never know what had truly happened. Tunde smiled to himself as he prepared the cup, watching the poison swirl as it mixed with the juice. He was careful, too careful to let even a drop fall outside the cup. Once it was done, he knew Zuri would drink it without a second thought. She had always trusted him, always believed that he would never harm her. And that was the beauty of it. The plan was foolproof. As he looked over his work, Tunde's arrogance bloomed. He believed in his success so fully that it blinded him to the dangers that lay ahead. In his mind, he was already tasting the sweet rewards of his actions. The land, the gold, the freedom to marry someone else, someone more suited to his desires, none of it would be possible without Zuri out of the way. And Zuri, in her trusting innocence, would never see it coming. But as Tunde placed the cup on the table, he paused for a moment. A cold shiver ran down his spine. For just a second, he thought he heard a distant voice, the voice of his father, his ancestors, warning him. But he shook the thought away, dismissing it as foolish superstition. Tonight, Zuri would drink the juice. And tomorrow, his life would change forever. The days that followed felt strange to Zuri, like a thick fog had descended over her mind. She could not understand what had changed, there was no clear reason for the unease that settled in her chest, yet it was undeniable. It was as if the earth itself had whispered a warning, a message that only she could hear. The rhythms of the village seemed to shift, and even the birds that flew over her house no longer sang with the same joy. Zuri watched Tunde closely, her gaze sharp and calculating, though she kept her suspicions hidden behind a calm exterior. His behavior had altered, and though she couldn't place the exact moment it began, she felt it. Tunde's once gentle smile had hardened into something distant, and his eyes, those eyes that had once shown so much love, now seemed cold, empty, as if they were looking right through her. It wasn't just his eyes. It was in the way he moved now. The slight hurried steps when he left the house in the mornings, the way he would linger in the doorway of their home, staring off into the distance, as if waiting for something, someone. And sometimes, she would catch him looking at her with a strange expression, like he was studying her, as though measuring her every reaction. But there were other things too, smaller things that bothered her. One evening, Zuri had prepared her usual juice for Tunde, a sweet blend of tropical fruits, cold and refreshing after a long day in the fields. She had added just a touch of honey, as she always did, but when she handed him the cup, she noticed something odd. The way he held it, the way his eyes darted quickly from the cup to her face, as if making sure she didn't notice something. His fingers brushed against the edge of the cup, but his hands didn't tremble as they had before. No, this time he was completely still, too still. Tunde's silence that evening was oppressive. He drank the juice, but there was no warmth in his words when he spoke, no affection, no longing, no joy. He merely nodded, as though it was routine. He sipped it slowly, with the air of someone who had already tasted it many times before. Zuri tried to ignore the feeling that crept up her spine, but it was impossible. The cup seemed to have grown heavier in her hands. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the shadows grew long, Zuri sat by herself, her thoughts a whirlwind. Her instincts, those deep, primal instincts, told her that something was terribly wrong. But what? What could she prove? She tried to recall the last few weeks, but the pieces didn't quite fit. There were just these strange feelings, the odd behavior, the secretive conversations between Tunde and his sister, Adama. Her mind drifted to the whispers she had overheard in the village, the elders talking about people who had suffered at the hands of betrayal, the poisonings that had come in the quiet hours of the night. She remembered the old tales her grandmother had told her about how the spirit of a woman was so tied to the land, how it could sense betrayal from far away, how a heart could grow dark and filled with malice. Was this the betrayal her ancestors had warned her about? Zuri's mind raced. What if Tunde was trying to hurt her? What if he was plotting against her, planning something that she couldn't see? Her intuition told her that danger was near, but she had no proof. She couldn't confront him directly without revealing her suspicion, and that might only push him further into his plan. As she lay awake that night, the moonlight filtering through the window, Zuri made a decision. She would not wait for the danger to find her. She would learn the truth, and she would protect herself, no matter the cost. She began to devise a plan to turn the tables on Tunde before it was too late. Her intuition had never failed her before, and this time, it was stronger than ever. The sun had set low on the horizon, casting a soft glow over the village, but Zuri's heart beat faster than ever. The time had come. She could no longer sit idly by, waiting for the poison to slowly creep into her veins. Her ancestors' voices whispered in her ear, urging her to act with wisdom and caution. She had waited long enough, watched and listened to the small clues that told her Tund had been planning something sinister. Now, it was her turn to turn the tables. Zuri knew she had to be clever. If she made any misstep, if her husband caught on to her suspicion, all would be lost. The plan had to be executed in silence, with precision, like the way the moonlight slides silently over the waters. She couldn't do it alone, though. She needed someone she could trust. And that person was Adama, her sister-in-law, who still had no idea about the treachery that brewed beneath the surface. Adama had always been kind to Zuri, her bright laughter echoing through the home like sunlight after a storm. Zuri had never suspected her sister-in-law of any ill intent. Adama, though naive in this matter, would play a crucial part in her survival. One evening, as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal, Zuri approached Adama casually, as though nothing were amiss. She spoke of trivial matters, the weather, the village gossip, and of course, her husband's recent moods. She spoke softly, as though it were nothing but a passing thought, but the words carried weight. Adama, Zuri said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency, Tund has been acting so strangely. I fear he is hiding something from me. Can you help me tonight, when he comes to drink his juice? I'm not feeling well, and I need you to bring the cup to him. Adama, always eager to help, nodded without hesitation. Of course, Zuri. What is it you need me to do? Zuri smiled faintly, trying to mask the nerves that threatened to betray her calm exterior. Just make sure he gets the cup when he's settled, and don't question anything. It's important. The moment Adama left the room, Zuri's pulse quickened. She had to be quick. She knew exactly where Tund would sit, and she knew he would always reach for his drink first, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The table was set, the cups ready. One would be the poison one, and the other, a cup of water that Tund would never suspect. The cup containing the poison had been prepared with such care, just as Tund had always liked it, rich, sweet, and full of the fruits of the land. But Zuri wasn't fooled. She knew she couldn't allow Tund to drink from it. She had already watched him, studying his every move over the last few days. She knew his habits well. Now, she would use that knowledge against him. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the juice into the 2 cups, the liquid shimmering darkly in the candlelight. She placed the poison cup at the far edge of the table, exactly where Tund would reach for it. Zuri's heart thudded in her chest as she thought of how to swap the cups without drawing his attention. Her breath caught as she heard Tund's footsteps outside the door. The time had arrived. She swallowed her fear, her mind as sharp as the spear of an eagle. She walked calmly to the table, placing the cup with the water in her hands. As she turned, she saw Adama coming into the room with the juice. It was the moment of truth. Zuri moved swiftly, in one fluid motion. She took the poison cup from the table and, with a steady hand, slid it closer to where Adama had placed the water. The swap was so smooth, so quiet, that even the air seemed to hold its breath. But even as the cups changed hands, a quiet sense of dread filled Zuri's chest. What if Tund noticed the shift? What if he had seen something, sensed something that she couldn't see? The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, Zuri feared the ground beneath her feet would give way. Adama, innocent and unaware, handed the cup to Tund. He took it without question, his eyes never leaving the cup as he sipped. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last, each one louder than the sound of the crackling fire in the corner of the room. She watched Tund drink the juice, her breath catching with every swallow he took. The room was filled with a tense silence, each second stretching into eternity. The plan had worked, for now. But Zuri knew the danger was not over. If Tund realized what had happened, if he figured out that his plot had failed, then the consequences would be swift and unforgiving. Tund sat back, a satisfied smile creeping across his lips as he watched the events unfold before him. The poison was working, slowly but surely. He could feel it in the air, thick with anticipation. His mind raced with thoughts of what would come next, the land he would claim, the wealth he would acquire, the life he would live without Zuri by his side. He had done it. He had outsmarted her. Outwitted her. When Adama entered the room, holding the cup of juice with both hands, Tund felt a rush of triumph. The moment had come. He leaned forward in his seat, his eyes locked on the cup as if it were a prize he had finally won. Zuri, too, had noticed the moment, though her expression remained serene. She had always been the one to serve Tunde, the one to prepare his meals and drinks with care. Tonight, it was Adama who had come with the cup, and the significance of that small detail was not lost on Zuri. It was a quiet victory, one that she would not shout from the rooftops but would savor in the silence of her heart. Tunde's hands were steady as he reached for the cup, the same steady hands that had once shown love, but now were filled with selfishness. He had no idea that the cup he was about to drink from was not the one meant for his wife. As his fingers wrapped around the cool rim, he glanced at Zuri, who sat quietly across the table. His eyes gleamed with arrogance, as if to say, "You will never see this coming." His confidence was his undoing. He raised the cup to his lips, savoring the moment before he drank. Zuri's eyes flickered briefly to Adama, who was sitting quietly beside him, her face glowing with innocence, unaware of the deadly game being played. Zuri's heart quickened in her chest, but she showed no outward sign of the tension building inside her. She knew exactly what was happening. As Tunde drank, his mind was already racing ahead, imagining the world that would soon be his. He took a deep sip, savoring the sweet taste of the juice, and then another, feeling the liquid slide down his throat. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, reveling in the sensation, oblivious to the fact that the poison was not going into his wife's body, but into his sister's. Tunde's overconfidence made him blind to the most crucial detail: the cup in his hands was the one meant for Adama. He had believed his plan was foolproof. No one would suspect that the wife might have figured it out, that the sister-in-law might be unknowingly complicit in his scheme. The thought never crossed his mind. He set the cup down with a satisfied smile, watching Zuri for a reaction. His eyes glinted, knowing that soon, very soon, she would begin to weaken. Her face would pale, and her steps would falter. She would start to feel dizzy, unwell. The poison would take its time, but by morning, she would be gone. He would be free. But Zuri did not show the signs of the poisoning he expected. She sat there, calm and composed, her eyes fixed on him, as if she knew everything. Tunde's smile faltered slightly. Something was not right. He glanced at Adama, who was still sitting beside him, her expression neutral, unaware of the danger creeping into her veins. Tunde's arrogance was now his greatest enemy. He had become so sure of his success, so consumed by his own belief that the plan would work without a hitch, that he missed the crucial signs of his failure. The poison had gone into Adama's body instead, and Tunde was none the wiser. Zuri, on the other hand, watched the scene unfold in eerie silence. She knew what had happened. She knew the poison would do its work, but not on her. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from seeing your enemy's plans unravel, all the while remaining calm on the surface. She had outwitted him. And now, she only had to wait. Tunde's heart raced as he watched his sister, Adama, struggling to breathe. Her once calm expression had morphed into one of pain and confusion. She gasped, her hands clutching at her chest, as though trying to fight an invisible force. The room, which had been full of anticipation moments ago, now felt suffocating. Panic seized Tunde as he reached for her, his mind scrambling for an explanation. But it was too late. The poison he had secretly slipped into her drink was working its deadly magic. Adama's eyes fluttered weakly, her body growing limp in his arms. His fear turned to horror as he realized that the very plan he had set in motion had backfired. Zuri sat quietly at the table, her expression unreadable. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it, knowing her husband's crime would unravel. His panic only deepened the irony. He thought he was controlling the situation, but it was she who held all the power. The poison had been meant for her, but in his haste, he had unknowingly sealed his own fate. Tunde's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to save Adama, but it was already too late. His sister's life was slipping away. He turned to Zuri, his voice shaking with desperation. "What did you do?" Zuri met his gaze calmly, her voice quiet but firm. "You underestimated me, Tunde. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I've been watching. You never had control, you were always the one being played." As Adama's breathing slowed to a halt, Tunde stood frozen, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. His plan had failed. His sister was gone, and the consequences of his betrayal were now undeniable. In the final moments, Tunde is confronted with the full weight of his actions. As the poison takes its toll on Adama, he is unable to undo the damage. Desperation consumes him, but it's clear that nothing he does can change the outcome. It is a powerful moment of realization for him. He's trapped by his own deceit. Zuri, his wife, finally reveals the truth. She had known about his plan all along. In her calm demeanor, there is no sign of panic, only quiet certainty. She has been steps ahead of him the entire time. Her calmness in the face of chaos contrasts sharply with Tunde's growing panic, highlighting how he has underestimated her and overestimated his own cleverness. This twist is a stark reminder that betrayal often blinds the betrayer, leaving them vulnerable to their own undoing. As Adama's life is saved, the tension in the room shifts. Though the immediate threat is neutralized, the consequences of Tunde's betrayal are irreversible. The family dynamic is shattered. Trust, once broken, cannot be easily repaired. Tunde's actions have irrevocably altered his relationship with both Zuri and Adama. The damage done isn't just physical, it's emotional, moral, and psychological. Adama, though spared from death, now knows the extent of the danger she was in, and the betrayal runs deep. In the end, the story serves as a powerful reflection on trust, betrayal, and the consequences of deceit. The lesson is clear: when trust is betrayed, the consequences are far-reaching and irreversible. Betrayal may offer short-term gains, but it comes with a high price, one that often leaves the betrayer alone with their guilt and regret. The moral of the story emphasizes that dishonesty, no matter how cleverly concealed, will eventually be exposed, and the harm it causes cannot be undone.